Let us begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, we're picking up with the Ten Commandments. Today we're going to go over the Ten Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant and the other kind of laws and seeing how these laws affected them. One important thing to realize, too, is we're going to get into this a little bit more later, is that Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers and Deuteronomy, for that fact, are all the same story. So some of the things we associate with Exodus are actually from those other ones. So today we're pretty much going to finish Exodus, but we're going to continue the Exodus story over the next couple of weeks by going into some of the sections of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and just to pull some stuff out of there. Because there's some of those stories that we're like, oh, this is a Moses story, so it has to be Exodus. Actually, it's Deuteronomy. But so we're gonna talk about that. But today we're just going to focus on the Ten Commandments and the other laws that we see in Exodus and the establishment of the covenant. So we're going to start on chapter 20. We're going to get right into the Ten Commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself graven images, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and to the third and fourth generation, to those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. It is, you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your manservant or your maidservant or your cattle, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is to them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservants, or his oxen, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now when the people perceived that the thunder, and were listening, and the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off, and said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will hear. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that the fear of him may be before your eyes, that you may not sin. Okay, so the first question that is kind of an interesting one is, they're the Ten Commandments. We all know that. And it's called the Ten Commandments in in Judaism and Christianity. But where do the 10 actually lie? Because there's some debate. So if in the Catholic circles and in Anglican circles, we tend to divide up it as the first 3, and we have the ones dealing with God, and then we have the last 7, and we split the covet your wife and covet your neighbor's things as 2 separate ones. And in others, they tend to combine that into one covet, and then they split up the you shall love your God, and then you shall have the other one. So they kind of split it up differently. And if you read the Exodus version, it actually leans more towards some of the Jewish and some of the Protestant counting of it. The Catholic circles dates back to Augustine, and it actually comes from Deuteronomy. So in Deuteronomy 5, we have a retelling of the Ten Commandments. And this one, it goes through all of them. I'm not going to reread all of them, but you'll see how it splits up. You shall not kill, neither shall you commit adultery. You shall not steal, neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. Neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house. So you can see how they divide it a little bit more clearly. And so there's actually two different words in the Deuteronomy. So it's covet is one. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and desire your neighbor's house. And they're two different words, and there's a slight nuance difference. So the Catholics tend to use the Deuteronomical, there's a fun word that I'm not saying correctly, counting of the Ten Commandments versus the Exodus version. Does it really matter? No, frankly. If it's there, it's all the same stuff. It's just where you decide to attend. But if you talk to some Protestants, they will get mad at you because we count the Ten Commandments wrong. And then you just let them read Deuteronomy, and then you say it's all the same stuff, and then we can move on. So it's just a point to point out. And then you can also tell if you see like a recreation of the Ten Commandments, you'll be able to pick out if it was made by Catholics or Anglicans or Jewish or Protestant sources because of how they number them. So as I said, if you divide, I'm going to use the Catholic divisions. If you divide the first three, it's our relationship with God, and the last seven is our relationship with neighbor. And if you look, the first three are much wordier, and the last seven are kind of simple, don't. So the first three establishes our relationship with God. So it's, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not use my name in vain, and keep the Sabbath day holy. So those are the big three. And so these are how we have that relationship with God. And you can see them as not a reaction, but you can see them, if you remember the golden calf, this is like already that, listen, you're going to mess this up. Here's what you need to not do. You just messed this up in pretty much every way possible. Here's the things that you're not supposed to be doing. So I will spell it out for you. It doesn't seem like you should have to, but I'm going to spell it out for you. So it's almost like the parent talking to the children. Sometimes you wouldn't think that you'd not have to tell your kid to eat sawdust, but they will. So then you have to spell it out. So the first one is, you shall not have any other God before me. So this is a big one. I take you out of Egypt. I'm your God. I'm a jealous God. No other gods. It's just me. You don't get an idol. You don't get any of these other things. You don't get any of the Egyptian gods. You don't get any of the Canaanite gods. You get me. I'm a jealous God. It's just me. This also hints at that, not hints, but plays at that understanding of the marriage relationship between God and his people. That this is adultery. That's what idolatry is. It's a form of adultery because you're cheating on God. You're cheating on that relationship. So you just get me. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image of any likeness of anything on the earth, under the earth, or in the sea. Now this is an interesting one because this is taken in modern Judaism. This is often taken to be against all images and worship in total. And this is an issue that comes up again and again. So it's the idea of iconoclasm. So are we allowed to use sacred images? Are we allowed to use the statues and the images and all that kind of stuff? And so early on, it's a clear, let's be careful about this and don't do it. Now, is it a really strict one? Well, if we go forward to, let me make sure I got too many tabs here. Nope. Here it is. Okay. So if we go forward in just the next couple chapters, in chapter 25, we have them making the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant is kind of like, we're going to get to this more detail, but it's kind of like what they should have done with the golden calf. They're going to take gold, they're going to take their resources, and now they're going to use them to glorify God. And on it, we have this very detailed description of how they make it. And you shall, this is verse 25, verse 18, and you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work, shall you make them, on 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub on one end and 1 cherub on the other, and of the piece with the mercy seat shall you make the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim shall spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with their wings, their faces one to another toward the mercy seat. Shall put the mercy seat on the top of the ark. And in the ark you shall put the covenant that I shall give you. So, we already see God telling them to make an image. And it's not just a symbolic image, like a vague, no. It has wings, it has a face. It's an image. So obviously God doesn't mean this as a very strict prohibition against the use of images. We'll also see this again when they make the temple, and they'll have images. They'll have pomegranates, and they'll have oxen to represent 12 oxen statues outside, and they'll have all these other images. So in modern Judaism, it tends to be a strict one. You'll also see this be a strict no images. In Islam, there's a strict you can't do anything with images. That's why if you go into I'm not thinking of the word, but like a Muslim church, they have art, but it's usually mosque. Thank you. It's patterns. They'll do geometric patterns, or if you see them how they do their calligraphy, they have beautiful calligraphy because that's the way they express their art, because they're not really allowed to use images. This also comes up in certain Protestant branches. So modern Mormonism. I'm not going to. There's a couple other ones that if you go into their church propers, they're usually very stark because they've kind of rejected the use of images. And then you'll hear that too, like, oh, Catholics, you worship statues and stuff like that. You're idolaters because you do that. So this also came up in the early church, and it kind of came up in the East as the iconoclasm issue. And in the East, they were like, can we use images? How do we use them? And so in the West and in the Catholic Church, we've taken a firm, because God became man, he's raised up. So because in the past we can't use images because we don't know what God looks like. We can't have that connection because God is something more than our understanding. But when God becomes man, he has a face. He has a face now. And so we can approach images and use them. Now, we're never supposed to, of course, worship them. They're tools. They help us. And so can people use Catholic images and abuse it and become a little idolatrous? Yeah, I've been into enough little old lady houses with so many statues that it makes you hard. Or the people who bury the St. Joseph statue to sell their house. Please don't bury St. Joseph to sell. We just have our new St. Joseph icon up. Don't bury St. Joseph. That is some superstitious, I want to use a worse word than I should. So don't do that. So they're symbols, they help us. And of course, this is made most clear in the Eucharist, because the Eucharist ceases to be a symbol and is the real thing. So it's bread turned flesh, and that is the focus. More than the cross, more than the icons, that's the focus. So this actually came up in a church. I remember I was having a conversation, and they had adoration, and they developed a habit where they were bringing out a Divine Mercy image and putting it in front, not in front of it, but like beneath it. And they're like, no, you don't do that. There's a reason why when we use the Eucharist, we don't put out any other images. We use the monstrance that points to it, and it might have angels around it or something, kind of again like the covenant, but nothing's supposed to detract from the Eucharist. You don't want to put any other images that would distract from the Eucharist. So when we see this use of images, are we allowed to use images? Yes. And even in the early ones, we've seen with the use of the cherubs, with the use of the temple, they're allowed to use images. What God doesn't want you to do is have idols. You're not allowed to have idols. You're not allowed to have the golden calf. You're not allowed to be like the Egyptian with their frog-headed people and their anteater-headed people and their dung beetles and all this other kind of stuff. No, you're not allowed to use idols. You're not allowed to worship other gods. You're not allowed to do. That's what they mean by graven. You're allowed to use tools. We'll see that because the next chapters are painstaking details about how they make the art, but you can't. This is one. And so this is one that comes up and you'll hear in circles. And it's like, no, we don't worship images. We use them as a tool. And that's all it's meant to be. And so did the Jews. So we are in good company. Okay, so then we move on to the third one, and it's keeping holy the Sabbath. And this was a perfect time for this because we just had it in our gospel about how we see that. So how do we keep holy the Sabbath? And of course, in the Catholic Church, this has come down to be kind of like the Sunday obligation, which of course is not currently in vogue. But you notice people still come to Mass. You still came to Mass. You didn't have any obligation to come tonight, but you did it because you wanted to. And that's what God's calling them to do. You're supposed to keep holy the Sabbath. And even, that's even the idea of obligation. When we say obligation, we don't mean you have to do this or we're going to send the Swiss Guard after you. No, we are going to do this because you need to do this to survive. It's all of the rules are there for protection. Just like when you set up your rules for your kid, they might not understand them all, but they should be there for the kid's protection. You're not allowed to play in the street because something bad could happen. You're not allowed to eat sawdust because something bad could happen. So you have to do these things. So it's that kind of stuff. So keeping holy the Sabbath is about keeping pure that relationship so that, again, we're not distracting ourselves. We're not doing anything unnecessary. Now, this can develop to extremes, again, on both sides. You can have the extremes that we see in Jesus' day where they're so concerned about every little letter that it becomes impossible to follow it, and it becomes really problematic. And so there's even in modern Judaism, there's been issues because, like there was in New York, it was a couple years ago, where they had a fire because you're not allowed to flip switches on in certain, every different sect of Judaism is a little bit different, but for them, you couldn't turn on switches. So they would leave their hot plates on all night because then they're not technically flipping a switch because that's starting a fire. You're not supposed to start a fire. That's where that comes from. Well, then they can still have heat, and then they can still cook their stuff, and then they haven't done it. Well, that led to leaving a hot plate on all night, which is not a good idea, and it burnt down a building, which is, of course, tragic. And so you can see how things can get out of hand, and you can do it. And now you can also take that to the other extreme. And I would say most Catholics probably today are in the other extreme. And I include myself in this one. Even though I say Mass for a living, I will admit I probably don't take the Sabbath day as holy as I could have, And when we say keep it holy, and we even we'll turn the term leisure, it doesn't mean you just sit around and be lazy all day either. The idea is it's there for worship. That's what Sunday is for. Or in the Jewish case, of course, it's Saturday. That's their holy day. It's the end of the week. Ours is the first day of the week. Ours is the 8th day. That's where that comes from. So it's that idea of we're supposed to be here to dedicate this day to God. Doesn't mean we can't do any type of work, but it does mean that we need to keep it holy, that we need to preserve it. And again, you can see this in Judaism. So Judaism will have it'll start off with a very strict rules of here's what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do on the Sabbath. And then they'll make rules based on that'll become even more. But again, that's that little kid, here's all the things you're not allowed to do. As our faith matures, okay. It's the same thing with the dietary laws. Don't eat these things. Okay, when you're an adult, okay, now you can do it. So now we can be. So Peter is allowed to eat the unclean foods because they're not unclean anymore. And so it's bringing on to that deeper understanding. Okay. Turn to the page. There we go. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. I think this is an interesting one because this becomes, in the modern context, don't say, oh my gosh. And I remember my mom would always get mad at me when we would accidentally say that. And she didn't even like, oh my gosh, because it's too close and things like that. And that's fine. And that's completely legitimate. But it's also more than that. I think really what the name of vain is, it's actually, like the word vain kind of comes from empty. That's where it's like, don't use the name, let it be empty. And what it's really talking about is like making false covenants or swearing. And I mean like literally, like don't swear of God. I think this is really more of a critique of bad religion. So don't use God to cover up your faults. I think that's really what this is about. Now, that comes with using our language appropriately, certainly. That's again, what comes out of our mouths. We can sin with our words, and words are important. And so how we speak how we represent ourselves, how we represent God, and it's to prevent blasphemy, that there is a such thing as blasphemy. But it's also about using religion appropriately. So again, going back to that pharisaical idea of I'm going to use religion because it makes me feel good. So I'm going to pray in the street corners so that everyone can see how holy I am. Well, you're definitely using God's name in vain. I'm going to use God to make myself feel better than all of these people, to isolate myself and say I'm better. Or look at these dirty sinners. So look at the Westboro Baptist Church and all the terrible things they've done. Yeah, they're using God's name in vain. So it's more than just a slip of the tongue or modern version of swearing or that kind of stuff. It's about understanding that relationship with God and not invoking it, not using religion in that relationship poorly. That's what using God's name in vain is. It's, I'm going to be Catholic, so I'm better than everybody else. I know this. And look at that guy who's atheist. He's going to hell. Is that kind of presumptive use. So it's, and this is a lot of my personal interpretation, I'll fully say, but I think this is more of a critique of bad religion. Don't use your religion as a weapon. Don't use it as a cudgel. Use it as to deepen your faith and to call people on to more. Honor your father and mother, that the days that may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. An interesting point about this is that it does specify mother, because obviously this is a very patriarchal, and I know that's a loaded term today, but I'm using it in the really proper sense of the word. It's patriarchal, the man is the head of the household, and that's how you understand. Each tribe is named after that and all that kind of stuff. But they go out of their way to say mother. It's not just your father. You have to honor your mother too, and it's actually an important thing. And the word honor is, in another word would be glorify. Glorify your parents. Now, one thing it does not say is obey. It does not say obey your mother and your father. By the way, those are my mom and dad right there, so it's fun to talk about this right there. So, it does not mean obey. What it does mean is honor. And there's a way of honoring them even in disagreeing with them. And so now when you're a little kid, you don't get to do that in that same way. It plays out in obedience. But when you're an adult, and I'm sure all of you experienced this with your own parents, that when you became an adult, the relationship changed, and that's okay. That it can change, and it should change. If it's the same as it is when you're a little kid, there's actually something wrong with that. Now, we can, again, be adults and still honor our parents. So it's about honoring not just your parents, but where you come from. Even like patriotism is kind of wrapped up in this. So, you honor your country because it's where you come from. You honor your nation, you honor your state, you honor your community, you honor your parents. It all kind of starts with the family. And that's actually where your priority lies. This is why you talk to people and they're like, Father, there's only, there's so many people who need my help. How do I know who to help? And it's like, it's okay to start with your family. You start with your family and work out from there. You have a priority to help your family, and then you help from others. And that's not an excuse not to help others, but you start with the family and work out. Because the family is the basis of civilization, family is the basis of covenant, family is the basis of religion, frankly. Sometimes we'll say, like, priests are the things. Like, no, it's not priests. It's the family. The family is the first church. That's why the parents are the first teachers of the thing. Like, the parents are the primary teachers. I'm a supplement. So your guys who are parents out, their job to make sure your kids know the faith. And then you bring them to church so I can help. But it's you guys first. The family is the first church. So it's that idea. And it's the whole family too. And so it's the whole family. It's the father and the mother. Now does that mean that there's not gender role? I know I'm not going to get into this too deep because this is a whole can of worms today that it shouldn't be, but it's silly. But the whole gender roles, no, of course there's gender roles. Of course men and women are different. Of course, you're going to do it. And that's fine. They're complementary. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that your mom and dad aren't exactly the same. Because which one's going to be easier, so you know what to go there so you don't get as much trouble. So it's like which one's going to be better. So things like that. And so it's one of those things. So it's good that they're different. And so but they're complements. Okay, you shall not kill. So very simple, very straightforward. This is not the best translation for the word. So this is not the word they would use for when you kill an animal to eat or something like that. This is more of the term like slay or murder. So that would be a better translation. You shall not murder. And the difference is, we'll see Israelites, again, we'll see in the commandments, if somebody breaks these laws, God says that the punishment is death and you should kill them. And so we'll see them fighting wars to conquer the Holy Land. So obviously there are times when killing can be necessary. There is a such thing as, to defend yourself, to defend your others, that killing can be justified. This is more speaking about murder. So like I'm making the choice to kill someone based on my own desires, whether it's to take something of theirs or because I'm mad at them or whatever. So a better nuance is murder, because we're okay with defending yourselves. You're allowed to defend yourself. And then you can take this we're not going to get all this, but you can take this all the way to just war theory and eating meat and all these other kind of things. So it's one of those things. It can go in a lot of directions, but just in that simple idea, don't murder people. And I think we know that. That's one of those things, most people can figure that out. Most people, it's like you almost shouldn't have to remind, like most codes, even if in other religions or in other things, that's the starting point. Okay, if we cannot kill each other, that would be good. That would be a good thing. You shall not commit adultery. Okay, right after the violence, we have sex, and those are usually the two big ones. So what are you gonna get kicked off TV for? Sex and violence. And so it's okay. Use your strength appropriately. Okay, use your sexuality appropriately. So don't have adultery. You're not allowed to do that. You can in matrimony, and that's going to be it. Now we'll see Judaism has not a perfect view of matrimony at this time, and we're going to see actually there's a critique of it that comes up, because obviously at this time they still have polygamy and they still have other ones, and there is divorce, but only men can divorce their wives. And Jesus will critique it himself. He'll say that was for the hardness of their hearts that he gave them these rules. But the essence is stay faithful to your partner in good times and in bad, and all those kind of vows that we all know, and that's like that. And and again, in the modern world, this hasn't changed. We might want it to change, and sometimes we think we're so different too, like, oh, we're so revolutionary that we're free and stuff. And we're like, we're not new. There's no new sins. And so it's, again, use the sexual gift appropriately. Use the sexual act appropriately. You shall not steal. So it's a respect of other person's property. And we're not going to read in detail, but we'll see in the rules that there's an idea of remittance. So if you get caught stealing, your punishment is directly related to what you did. So if you steal a sheep and you get caught, you have to give 2 sheep back. If you steal a sheep and they can't tell the sheep, you have to give 5 sheep back. And so there's an idea of like, okay, well, you have to make amends for what you did in a like manner. So you make amends what you can do. But it's a respect for property. We are allowed to own things. Owning things is okay. It's actually good. And that as individuals, as families and things, we are allowed to own things, and we should respect each other's property and not take it. And that's true on the small individual level. That's true on the national level, where it's like countries shouldn't steal from each other and abuse, and then you get into all the stuff about mineral rights versus all these other kind of things. And again, you can take it in lots of different directions, or where it's that an abusive contract and all that kind of stuff. But again, in the essence is respect other people's property, don't steal, and this it would include don't set up a system that takes advantage of people. So you can see that again on a corporate level and things like that. So if a corporation sets up an unfair practice like a monopoly and they're abusing their power, okay, well, yeah, same thing with a government. If they're abusing their power, that violates somebody's rights, not just to themselves but to their property, that's bad. And on the individual level, of course. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, of course, this kind of becomes, and again, we almost boil it down to like the 3rd grade PSR CCD version of a lot of these, and it's like, okay, don't lie. And that's true again in the general sense, but this is being more specific. Bear false witness means in a very specific case, don't lie under oath. That's really what this is saying. And that speaks to the judicial system. So of course at the time, they don't have CSI or a police force or anything like this. So they depend on witnesses and eyewitnesses. And so it's really you make something based on how many, as long as there's 2 or more people who admit to it. But they know that can be abused. So we'll see this get abused in the time of Israel under Ahaz and Jezebel. And Ahaz, the wicked king, wants Naboth's garden. And so what does Jezebel do? She hires 2, I forget what they use, it's a great word, it's like scurvy or something like that, men, scrupulous or unscrupulous men, and to ruffians to lie. And then they end up stoning Naboth, and the king is able to take the garden because these 2 people lie under oath. So what this doesn't mean, though, or at least personal interpretation, I think you're allowed to have surprise parties. And so, because sometimes some people make a very strict definition of you can't lie ever at all times. And it just defies common sense to a certain sense. So there's the basic ones of, if your wife comes out and says, do I look good in this dress? You say yes. You say yes, first of all, because what she's really asking is, do you still love me? And the answer is yes. And so that's what you answer. Because sometimes there's a question behind the question, and you answer that. And then there's also other times, there's also a sense of a right to know. So if somebody's going to abuse something, you don't have to give them the full truth. So the classic answer is this. You're in Nazi Germany and you have Jews in your attic and the Gestapo is at your door and they're knocking on your door. Do you have Jews here? You say no. There's some people who are kind of moral theologians who are like, well, you can just speak in like cagey language and like, do you see any Jews here? But you shouldn't directly lie. And that seems silly, because what it comes down to is if they're going to abuse the knowledge you're going to give them, you don't have to give them the proper thing. So and that's an extreme example on purpose. So if they're going to kill that person based on your knowledge, you don't have to tell them the truth. Now, oftentimes the best thing is just to say nothing. Sometimes we can just say nothing. And that doesn't mean you can get away with every little white lie, because sometimes little white lies are more about our convenience than the convenience of the situation. So it's not a strict prohibition that we have to say the 100%, the literal truth every time, but it is also understanding that what we are is trying to convey truth and we're not trying to deceive. And that's the other thing too. It's more about deceit rather than being 100% factually true. Because, you can lie with selling something that's 100% true. That can happen. We can see people who have been, again, going back to the contracts, where a contract looks really good, but then in the fine print, well, you should have read this. I'm like, that's a form of deceit. When it's called ice cream, but it doesn't have any of the real things, and they have to call it like flavored or something like that. And there's some deceit going on there. There's some trickery going on there. So it's more about being honest, understanding what the person is expecting from you, and that in general, we do owe the truth to one another. So in general, we owe the truth, and so that we shouldn't lie. It doesn't mean we always have to, we don't always have to say something. That's the other thing. I think that's the out that most people don't realize is say nothing. So people can come up and say, Father, what did you hear? What did they say in confession? I'll just say, shut up, and I'll walk away. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say, well, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to do one way or the other. I'm not going to answer. So there's things like that where it's like, just don't answer. Or just say, I'm not going to answer that. That's actually a surprising one. I've done that a couple, not just, nobody actually asks me what I hear in confession, but people come up and ask me about something or other. I'm like, I'm not going to answer that. They're always like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing you could do, and it's a fun one to give. Try it out. It's a fun one to do. Okay, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or his maidservant or his oxen. So, again, we split it up into 2, but I'm going to take it as a big lump. I'm going to be a little bit Protestant here and just treat it as one. So basically, this is shifting it back to the interior. So all the other ones have been outside stuff. Don't kill, don't cheat, don't do this. Now it's turning interior, and this is an interesting one. This is really what separates the 10 Commandments from like the Code of Hammurabi or some other early laws that we've seen in different things, because those are much more concerned about exterior things, whereas this one, the fact that you're not allowed to covet is showing that there's an internal reality. So this is, of course, going to be echoed in Jesus' words. If you've committed adultery in your heart, then you've committed adultery. Now, does that mean, even in Jesus' words, does that mean it's the exact same thing? Of course not. Of course it's, if you leave it to the heart, its head, and it just stays in your head, it can still be sinful and can still be wrong. But of course it's worse to do the actual physical thing. But the point is that, yes, the Ten Commandments aren't just about keeping the law. They're not just about law and order. They're about creating that relationship with God and becoming a better person. So this is that interior part, that even in your heart, you shouldn't covet. Now, again, that's still an action. This isn't the bubble up jealousy of, oh, that looks nice, I would like that. That happens to all of us. So you're allowed to have that bubble up. Now, what do you do with that bubble up? Now, if you take that bubble up of, oh, that's really nice. Jim has that nice snowmobile. I'd love to have that snowmobile. And Jim's a jerk. He doesn't deserve it. Why does Jim get nice things? Stupid Jim. That's when it becomes problematic. So if it's oh man, I really wish I would like that. Okay, that's fine. Man, I'm a little jealous. Okay. But now I'm going to start getting mad at Jim and do that. That's why it focuses not just on the thing. Don't do your neighbors. The focus is on the neighbor. Don't violate your neighbor. Again, it's violating their rights because you're cursing them in your heart kind of thing. So it's about that interior relationship. And so that's the big difference that these last two are calling towards us, is that we need to be good. This isn't just making about a civilization that works together. This is about making holy people. This is about that relationship with God. So the interior is important too. So that's a good one, and that's a very unique one in Judaism. Okay, after the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments are the basics. So all the other ones kind of stem forth from the basics. And you can see how they all uphold today. They're all basic and simple, and it's a very good one. So they're simple. Now, of course, once you have something simple, there's going to be people who try to find loopholes. So the rest of the ordinances are them trying to flesh out these Ten Commandments. And some of them, I'm going to touch on some of them because they don't translate it well. You know, it's easy for us to understand, okay, if somebody steals from you, you get it back and you get more back. Okay, that makes sense. But some of the other ones, putting it into context is important. So let's go to 21. So this is laws concerning slaves. Now these are the ordinances which you shall set before you. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and he bears him sons or daughters, the wife or child shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then this master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him for life. So, a couple important things to realize about slavery. First of all, in the ancient world in general, the word for slave and servant is the same, and the distinction is not there. This is also true when, they don't have a modern economy. So, working as a day laborer and things like that we see kind of even in Jesus' time doesn't exist in the same way here, and even that, this is 98% of people are in subsistence living. You're a farmer or you're a herder and you're just trying to get enough to get by. So this is not the slavery as we understand it in American history slavery. So first of all, it's not race-based. It's clearly not, because we've seen that if you can have a fellow Hebrew slave. And it is also not permanent for the most part. It is not meant to be permanent. So you have 6 years, so it's kind of like an form of indentured servitude. So you know what? And then I'm not going to read all of them, but there's actually a lot of rules about how you have to treat your slave and what rights your slaves have and how you can't abuse them and all these other kind of things. And so it's really more about that, what are your other options kind of thing. So there's plenty of cases of people kind of selling themselves into slavery because it's the only way they're going to eat. And so this is okay, so they do it. So there's also a sense, too, of a covenant bond. So this is even true in, like, the ancient Romans, that your slave is considered part of your household. So it's actually part of your family. So this is compared to, again, like American slavery, where there's a very, very clear distinction between the slaves and their property. They don't really see slaves as property. They still see them as people, and so they can't just do whatever they want with them. Because that's why, I mean, the slaves have rights, so that's something to be said. And they have to, and you can even see that, you can see some slaves want to be part of it. So they go, and bore means pierce. So you get a pierced ear, so if you want to be a slave for life. And so it becomes this kind of symbol that, okay, it's a form of covenant. I'm making a covenant, this relationship with you. And so, okay, now does that mean it's good? No. It doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's kind of that necessary evil for the time being because of the world that they're in. And so and we'll see as the world develops, we move more and more away from this. And the church moves more and more away from this. So that's why you see quickly the establishment of serfdom. And it's actually interesting. So while there still was slavery in the Middle Ages, it was actually really, really low. You only see an increase in slavery after the discovery of the New World, where then they have, again, our modern form of chattel slavery, which is basically the worst form of slavery that existed in human history. So it's important to put it into context. Is it slavery? Yes. Is it made for a time and place? Yes. Is it good? No. But it's kind of like the best of all the options. This is not good, but it's the best of all the options. So I don't have it marked down, but in a similar way, we'll see later on that when they talk about gleaning the fields, and when you do your fields, you're not allowed to go back over. You have to leave the loose grain to be gleaned. That means picked up individual grains, and you have to leave the loose grapes so that the poor people can come in. So can you imagine being so poor that you're going to go through somebody's area and just pick up stray kernels of wheat or barley or loose, dirty grapes on the ground, and that's seen as a thing? Well, if the other option is starvation, that's good. So you can see how these relationships are different. It's a different world, and we have to put it into that context. Actually, the same thing is going to be true with polygamy. Is polygamy good? No. But you can understand how it developed, and especially in this time and in this place. And so it's not good. And in fact, there's a running critique of polygamy and actually of slavery throughout it. So while it's permitted, it's never really seen as a good thing. And we'll see the opposite. Again, we'll see Jesus say, free those in prisoners, free the slaves. One of the first converts is the Ethiopian eunuch who's a slave. And so it's important to put this into context, that this is not the same slavery that we think of in the American context, that it's more of a mix between indentured servitude, and it's more of a mix of that. And again, that doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's the world that existed at the time. So they kind of had to do with what they had to do. You know, it's always important that we put things in their historical context. Especially, you know, we've seen this. I just saw someone complaining about certain words Lincoln said about black people. So is Lincoln perfect in his understanding of race as we would understand it today? Definitely not. But he also freed all the slaves. So you know what? It's like sometimes we have to give people in history and put them into context. And that the understanding that we are born in a world that we have the ability to, and again, privilege is another word that gets thrown around a lot today, but we have the privilege of being in a world where we don't have to worry in these same ways. So it's a different world. So it's just, like I said, it's just important to put that into context. Okay. Man, I can talk for a long time, can't I? So I'm going to go for another 20 minutes because I think I can finish this up. Okay, so we see them on 24. We see the covenant is established. So there's a lot of other rules and establishing of the feast and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of good stuff, but it's also a lot of rules and stuff. So we see the establishment of the covenant. We see Moses does this through sacrifice, and he dips his finger in blood and he sprinkles it on the people. And then after that, they have a meal of the sacrifice. So of course, this reminds us of a lot of things. It's a reminder of baptism because they're going through the liquid sprinkled on them. It's also the sacrifice, kind of like the Passover. So they're going from death. It requires a sacrifice, and it's also a meal. That's an important thing in Judaism, that the sacrifice is always a meal. So they do that not only when they kill the animal, then they eat it as a community. And that's why they make a big deal about you're not supposed to save it. You have to eat it all. And there's a rule in here where you have to eat it all that day or the next day. But if you eat it on the third day, I don't know if they say you put to death or you're getting kicked out of Israel, but it's like a really big, so if you eat that covenant meal, that Passover meal on the third day, you're in big trouble. And why is that? It sounds like, does God hate leftovers? No, it's because this is a sacrifice. This isn't just food. This is sacrifice and meal together. And of course, this is a prefigurement, a foreshadowing of the Eucharist. And we can see this made even more clear because then they have the showbread, or the bread of the presence. And the bread of the presence, which is on the table that they make, which is one of the things that's in their tent, that's kind of in their mobile temple, is the showbread, and it's to represent the presence of God through the bread. So it's an interesting, and it's supposed to be a symbolic. They don't believe in transubstantiation or anything like that, but it is that representation again of the man in the desert and how that represents God's presence to them. The other thing is then we have the creation of the Ark of the Covenant, and there's a lot of details about how they form the Ark of the Covenant. It's made of acacia wood, and then it's covered in gold, and they get their best smiths to do it, and then they have their temple around it, and then they have their lampstands, and they have all these kind of details about how to worship. And that's the importance here. So the covenant is for worship, and worship is communion. So this is how we interact with God. We worship God, and this is how we're doing it. And so the temple, the tent, becomes a mobile Mount Sinai. They're taking Mount Sinai with them. That's why in the Ark of the Covenant, they place the 10 Commandments, they place some of the manna, they place the staff of Moses and Aaron. I think it's both staffs. And it's because it's a symbol of everything they've gone through. It's a reminder of all the things they've gone through. And that's why it's called the tabernacle. That's why it's, again, another word for that, because that's the tabernacle. And that's why we call this the tabernacle today. And that's where we keep the Eucharist, because that's our most important thing. That's why when Jesus dies, the veil that blocks it off rips, because that's no longer the most important thing. Up until then it is. The Ark of the Covenant is the most important thing, because it's that reminder where they came through. It's all the symbols of what they came through to get to that point. And it becomes that sense of worship. And so that's that calling on that this is what the covenant is formed for. It's for worship. It's for communion. Okay. Points I needed to make. Okay, I think that actually brings me down. So let's end just with the last section. So we're going to end with just the very last. So this is chapter 40. So after all of that, they've made the tabernacle. They've made the tent. They've made the Ark of the Covenant. They've placed the objects within, the holy objects within. They've done all of their things, and now they're ready to leave and continue on their journey to the Holy Land. So this is 40:34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. The tabernacle is the whole space. It's not a small thing. It's the whole space of the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud abode upon it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle throughout all their journeys. Whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would go forward. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not go onward till the day that it was taken up. For throughout all their journeys, the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it at night in the sight of the house of Israel. So now we're at the point. So they've made up for what they messed up. The golden calf was a big minor step, but now they've swerved back. The covenant is formed. They have the 10 Commandments. They have their basic level of rules, and now they're ready to go to the Holy Land, or at least begin the journey there. We're going to see the more missteps and all the other kind of fun stuff that happens. But that's where we've got so far. So that's where we're going to end tonight, and we're going that. I know this is more moral theology than actually historical talking about it, but it's still fun stuff. So next week the next couple of ones we're going to be more jumping around a little bit because like I said, we're going to do Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Leviticus is mostly rules, and it's how we live out that covenant. But then we also have some other stories, and some very important stories, like the bronze serpent on the staff and things like that. So we're going to have some more of that. So we're going to continue on, and we might make it all the way to the Holy Land, and we might even be able to get into Joshua, which is cool because Joshua is one of the more fun stories. There's lots of good stuff in that. It's also the more action-packed one because there's lots of fighting and good stuff like that. I don't know why they haven't made a good Joshua movie. It lends itself really well. Like it's really bloody and gory and in all the good ways, and it's for Jesus, and well, not for Jesus, for God, so you can get away with it. Okay. Let's end there. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. In the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you all. You all have a very good night.